He didn't come here for answers. He came because silence was the only thing that didn't hurt. But some places don't stay silent. They remember. And when the wind moved through Timberline Creek that winter, it carried something waiting to be found.
Helios Ridge. Adventure awaits.
All right, I've cross-referenced the global weather patterns with the seismic.
The county annex in Boundary County smelled like wet wool and overbrewed coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, buzzing just enough to make a quiet room feel anxious. Eli Mercer stood at the counter with a folded cashier's check in his hand, and the kind of stillness you only learn after years of waiting for bad news. His left shoulder ached the way it always did when the weather turned. He ignored it. "I'm going to say this out loud," the clerk said, sliding a manila envelope across. "So nobody says I didn't. That cabin isn't up to code. The access road's a mess. We don't guarantee anything about the well, the septic, the roof, or anything." "I read the packet," Eli said. He kept his voice even, polite. "I'm buying it anyway." She tapped her pen on the counter, then gave a little shrug that was part pity and part town etiquette. $600, she said, plus fees. Eli passed the check. Beneath the counter, Rook lay flat with his paws out, looking like a brindle rug that could spring to life. He was a Dutch shepherd with a road map of scars under his coat and a calm that could steady a room. When the door opened and a gust of cold came through, Rook flicked one ear and then went back to doing what he did best, paying attention to everything. The clerk stamped, signed, and finally looked up. "You used to be the medical guy with search and rescue, didn't you?" she asked, as if the memory had just returned to her from a shelf she hadn't dusted in a while. "Was," Eli said. "My brother said you stayed on that ridge line through the nor'easter last February," she added. "Said no one else would have." "Your brother made it home," Eli said. "That's what matters." She nodded. "Timberline Ridge Road 231, she said, closing the file. "You'll want chains, and a shovel, and probably a little luck." "Luck's never hurt," Eli said. Outside, snow drifted across the parking lot in sheets. Not hard yet, just persistent. The kind of storm that didn't look like much until you stepped into it and realized it meant to keep going all day. Eli loaded the envelope into the glove box, checked the toe strap and the recovery boards, and looked at Rook. The dog held his gaze and thumped his tail once against the seat. "Ready." They took Highway 2 out of town, then cut onto a county road that turned from asphalt to gravel and from gravel to a suggestion. The forest was all tight fir and cedar, the trees rising close and straight, black-green against the white. Eli drove like a man who'd learned the cost of hurrying. He let the truck crawl where the road narrowed and the drifts thickened. Twice he got out to roll a fallen limb to the ditch. Both times Rook jumped down beside him, not because Eli needed the help, but because partnership is a habit. The first sign of the property wasn't the cabin. It was a tacked-up sheet of aluminum on a crooked post. U.S. Forest. Service, decommissioned lookout. No services. Someone had shot it twice for punctuation. Beyond, Timberline Ridge ran like a narrow spine, the road cut into its shoulder. To the north, the land dropped away into the draw where Timberline Creek gathered itself from snowmelt and patience. Eli eased the truck into a small turnout and let it idle. The fire lookout cabin sat 30 yards upslope on concrete piers, squat and square, windows boarded on the windward side, roof patched with mismatched shingles. The attached catwalk sagged at one corner like a tired porch. The stovepipe was still in place. He could see where lightning had licked it. Rook jumped down first, paws punching through the crust. Eli grabbed a snow shovel and a crowbar, then made a path up the drifted steps. The front door resisted, then gave, as if it didn't want to seem eager. The inside smelled like dust, old wood, and a winter that never quite left. The place had the bones of a lookout. A single square room, desk built into the window wall, a map case, a rack for a radio that was long gone, a steel-framed cot with no mattress. In the corner, bolted over a concrete pad, a cast-iron stove sat like a black anchor. The stovepipe ran up through the roof, sealed with ancient tar that had cracked like dry riverbed. Eli swept a path with his boot, set his pack on the desk, and let the quiet settle. Rook trotted the perimeter, nose low, doing his slow, steady inventory. He paused at a stack of old topo maps, at the bottom of the door where mice had been, and then at the stove. He stood there for a long 3 seconds. Nothing dramatic. Just the pause. The one that says, "This is information." Eli watched, said nothing. He didn't reward the behavior and didn't call it off. He'd learned not to make a show of the dog's instincts. People ask for parlor tricks. They don't always like what working dogs actually find. He checked the rest of the cabin. A couple of rotted food boxes in the cabinet. A clipped newspaper pinned to the wall about a lightning complex 10 years back. A pencil drawing scratched into the paint by a bored lookout. A mountain lion, crude but careful. The wellhead sat 20 yards downslope in a little shed with a padlock that had given up, the pump long removed. The outhouse leaned just enough to make a second trip unappealing. Eli made notes in a pocket notebook. Roof, window seals, stair stringers, chimney flashing. Everything could be fixed. Everything would take time. Back inside, he set water to boil on a backpacking stove and poured it over grounds in a steel mug. He liked coffee he could taste. He stood by the window, looking out at the draw. The creek was hidden by forest, but he could hear it under the wind if he wanted to. Low, deliberate, like a voice through a wall. Rook settled near the stove, chin on paws, eyes half closed but not asleep. Eli sipped and let the heat get into his hands. He hadn't come up here for a mystery. He'd come for quiet, for work he could see, for a place that didn't ask him to answer a radio in the dark. He had not saved Tommy Hale. The thought moved through him like a cold draft you can't quite seal. That day on the ridge, rotor wash, the sound too late. The snow, fracturing like a pane of sugar, had moved in and rented a room in his chest. He paid it rent by keeping busy and by not talking about it. He wasn't superstitious, but grief made its own rules. The truck's engine ticked as it cooled. Wind shouldered the south wall, the room filled with the small, honest noises of a place waking up because someone had come. There are 2 ways a dog tells you something matters: noise and stillness. Rook used stillness. He lifted his head and looked at the stovepipe collar where it passed through the ceiling. He didn't move his ears or his tail. His eyes flicked once to Eli, then back to the same spot, as if to say, there. Not urgent, but there. All right, Eli said. He set the mug down, grabbed the flashlight, and stood on the cot frame to get level with the ceiling. The flashing looked wrong, a bead of caulk inconsistent with the rest, the paint a shade off. He probed with the flat end of the crowbar and felt the tool slide into a seam that shouldn't exist. He stopped. Not because he was afraid of what was there, but because he had learned to treat unknowns with dignity. He climbed down, took a long look around the room, and opened the door to the outside. If he was going to pull something apart, he wanted fresh air and an exit. On me, he told Rook, who came and sat at his left leg without fanfare. Eli pried the trim loose slowly, easing each nail out without snapping the wood. The board came away clean, revealing a narrow cavity framed between joists, 4 inches wide, running along the stovepipe collar, lined in dull gray metal. Lead. Someone had gone to trouble to build this. Someone had expected time to cover their hands. Within the cavity, wrapped in a layer of plastic and waxed canvas, was a steel lockbox the size of a shoebox. No brand, heavy for its size. He set it on the desk and angled it under the light. No keyhole, just a recessed latch with a slot for a coin or a screwdriver and 2 hex screws filled with something that looked like pebbled glue. Rook exhaled through his nose, as if to say the obvious. We didn't come here for this, but here it is. Eli looked out the window again, into the weather. Snow had thickened into a steady, cross-grained fall. He could see his own tracks already softening. He checked the ridge road. No lights, no sound beyond the timbers sifting, no sign he'd been followed. He studied the box. The right answer was to leave it alone until he'd photographed it, documented where it sat. Maybe even called the sheriff to say he'd found something at a county property. The right answer depended on what county you were in and who the sheriff was. At the annex, the clerk had done her job and then something extra, the warning she wasn't required to give. Everyone gave warnings up here, if they liked you, or even if they didn't. But the warnings weren't always about storms or bad roads. Eli pulled his phone and snapped photos anyway. Box in the cavity, cavity dimensions, the lead, the collar, his watch in frame for scale. He stepped outside, snapped the cabin from the front so the snowfall pattern and light would timestamp the moment in ways metadata could not, then came back in and latched the door. He found a flathead bit, set the box on a folded jacket to keep it from skittering, and worked the latch with steady pressure. It gave with a muted click. The lid lifted a half-inch and stuck, glued by years of cold. He slid a razor blade under, cut the seal, and opened it slowly. Inside lay 2 SD cards in labeled sleeves, a spiral-bound waterproof notebook with the cover torn and retaped, 4 glass vials with rubber stoppers, and a folded thermal paper print rolled tight and secured with a rubber band that had gone brittle. He didn't touch anything for a long 30 seconds. He just stood there and listened. To the wind, to the cabin, to his own heartbeat refusing to hurry. Rook didn't move at all. He put on nitrile gloves from his medkit and opened the notebook first. The first page held a neat block print. Elena Park. Hydro, Field Unit, Timberline Creek Basin. Under that, a line in pencil, faint but legible. If you're reading this and I'm not here, I didn't leave. Eli closed his eyes so he wouldn't have to see the words for a breath. People who mean to disappear don't write notes like that. People who plan to return do. He flipped. Entries with dates and streamflow readings, conductivity spikes after rain, GPS coordinates in the margins, a paragraph about basalt tubes and tailing slurry, and anomaly near lava cut. He knew enough geology to be uneasy. The thermal paper, when he warmed it in front of the stove, bloomed faint lines like veins. A map of the ridge under the ridge, a hidden circulatory system feeding the basin. Someone, Elena, had mapped something that wasn't meant to be mapped. Out on the ridge road, a motor sound droned and then faded. Not close. Not yet. The hairs along Eli's forearms rose anyway. He slid the SD cards into the inner pocket of his flannel, where his body heat would protect them. He photographed the first 5 notebook pages, then the vials, each labeled with a date and a set of coordinates, and a note. Post-storm sample. He packed the contents back exactly as he'd found them. The box went into the cavity, the lead-lined board back in place, the nails pressed into their old holes, the seams smoothed with a finger of dust. He wasn't hiding what he'd found. He was buying time for a decision to catch up to circumstances. Rook stood and stretched, front paws long, spine bowed, then sat again, facing the door. The dog didn't growl, didn't posture. He just watched, calm and focused. Eli poured the cold coffee into the snow outside and made a fresh cup. He added nothing to it. He rubbed a thumb along the rim of the mug and watched the wind lift curtains of snow off the ridge. He thought of Tommy Hale and of promises that haunt because they're honest. He looked at the map again, at the delicate web of tubes under a valley, where people drank water and took showers and mixed formula for their babies. He hadn't come up here to fight anyone. He had come to make a small life in a hard place with a dog who'd been given a second chance. But if a person finds a light left burning, there's only one decent thing to do. "Okay," he said. Not to Rook, but with him. "We'll do it right." Rook tipped his head, the smallest acknowledgement. Eli finished his coffee. He checked the truck's chains and the fuel and the radio he kept set to weather band. He brought in 2 loads of firewood from the shed, so he wouldn't have to do it after dark. He swept the floor, cleared the stove, lit a fire, and watched it catch. The heat moved into the room slow and sure, the way good decisions do. The wind rose. The ridge answered. The last light slid behind the firs, and the creek kept talking to the valley like it always had. Eli wasn't a lawman or a crusader. He was a medic. He solved problems by stopping the bleed and keeping people breathing until help arrived. He looked at the ceiling where the box had been hidden, and then at the place on the map labeled Lava Cut. In his head, he started making a list. Names, steps, contingencies. He didn't know yet who would be on the other end of those steps. He knew only that the right people would be the ones who didn't flinch at the word evidence. The cabin settled as the heat found the joists. Rook circled once and lay down where he could watch both door and stove. Snow thickened. Somewhere beyond the trees, on a road where no one had a good reason to be, an engine turned over and then went quiet again. Eli set his mug on the windowsill and told himself the truth out loud, so he'd hear it later when things got loud. "This place isn't haunted," he said. "It's carrying something." Rook's tail thumped once. The fire popped. Night came down clean, and for the first time in a long time, Eli felt something like purpose climb up out of the old ache and take a seat beside the fear. Morning came slow and silver, the kind of light that doesn't rise so much as seep. The stove had gone cold sometime before dawn. Eli Mercer woke to the sound of wind brushing the shutters and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of Rook at his feet. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the ache in his shoulder and the smell of ash reminded him. He pushed off the blanket and sat up, rubbing his hands together until the blood returned. His watch read 6:17. Outside, the storm had dropped maybe 6 inches overnight. Not bad, by mountain standards. The sky was bruised gray and low, the kind that promised either clearing or more of the same. Around here, the only way to tell was to wait. Rook stretched, shook once, and came over to nudge Eli's knee. The gesture meant both I'm ready and you should be too. "All right, buddy," Eli said, voice rough with sleep. "Let's see what survived the night." He started the fire again, fed it kindling, then split a few logs out on the porch, each strike echoing across the frozen draw. The rhythm steadied him. When the cabin began to warm, he poured black coffee into an enamel mug and carried it to the window. Below the ridge, Timberline Creek wound through the trees, a white thread barely visible beneath the snow-covered limbs. It looked peaceful, almost untouched. That word, almost, stuck with him. He checked the tire he'd patched the night before. Still holding. The tracks from the county SUV had nearly vanished under fresh snow. whoever the sheriff was trying to impress by driving up here yesterday. It hadn't been him. By 10 a.m., the sky began to lighten. Eli decided to make a supply run to Silverford before the next front rolled in. He needed kerosene, canned food, and maybe some plywood to patch the windward side. He left the stove banked low, secured the latch, and whistled for Rook. The dog bounded into the passenger seat like it was routine, not the first week of a new life. The road out was slick, rutted by melt and refreeze. About 3 miles down, near the turnoff by the old mill road, Eli noticed something odd. New tire tracks. Heavy ones. Dual rear wheels. Deep tread. Less than an hour old. He slowed. The snow told stories if you knew how to read them. These belonged to something large. A truck. Maybe commercial. Maybe local. The tracks veered toward the same direction he was headed. Toward town. He followed at a cautious distance. When he reached the main road, he saw the vehicle parked at the Timberline General, the only place for 20 miles that sold both coffee and chainsaw oil. A black pickup, spotless, too new for this zip code. Chrome accents, tinted windows, and an Idaho vanity plate that read Pt.1, Helios Ridge Extraction. The logo was on the tailgate, a gold sunburst over crossed pickaxes. Eli parked across the lot, killed the engine, and stepped inside. The warmth hit him first, then the smell of bacon and pine cleaner. The bell over the door gave a half-hearted jingle. 2 men sat at the counter. One wore the sheriff's khaki jacket, the other a dark wool coat too nice for the place. The man in the coat turned at the sound of the bell and smiled as if the timing had been rehearsed. "You must be Mr. Mercer," he said, standing with easy grace. "Small world." Eli nodded once. "You've got me at a disadvantage." The man extended a hand. "Conrad Vale. I'm with Helios Ridge Extraction. We operate just south of here. Sheriff Maxton mentioned someone had bought the old lookout. Thought I'd come by, make introductions." "Seems you just did," Eli said. He didn't take the man's hand right away, but he didn't leave it hanging either. When he finally shook, Vale's grip was confident, dry, measured. Corporate handshake. Exact pressure, exact eye contact. Nothing left to chance. "Beautiful area up there," Vale said. "Untouched wilderness, lots of mineral history. The Forest Service used to monitor the slope for volcanic seepage, I think. You find everything in order?" Eli sipped his coffee before answering. "Mostly." "Good, good." Vale smiled, all polished friendliness. "I'll be straight with you. That cabin sits on an access route Helios uses for seismic monitoring. Technically county land, but the easement's complicated. If you ever decide the upkeep isn't worth it, my company would be happy to take it off your hands. Say, $5,000. Cash." Eli looked at him over the rim of the mug. "I paid $600. You're offering almost 10 times that." Vale's smile didn't flicker. "We believe in fair compensation. Some parcels have historic data that can cause confusion if they're not properly managed." Sheriff Maxton chuckled, stirring his coffee with a spoon he didn't need. "Meaning you'd be doing everyone a favor, right, Conrad?" Vale ignored the tone. "Just think about it, Mr. Mercer. Winter's rough up there. We could have a check drawn by tomorrow." Eli set the mug down. "I'll think about it," he said, meaning the opposite. "Appreciate the offer." Vale inclined his head, satisfied enough to pretend. "Of course. My card, if you need anything." He slipped it onto the counter, black with a gold logo, no email, just a phone number and the company crest. Eli didn't pick it up. He left a few dollars for the coffee and headed for the door. As he opened it, Maxton called out, "Storm's supposed to hit again tonight. Roads will close quick. Don't get stuck up there, you hear?" Eli didn't answer. Rook was waiting in the truck, nose pressed to the window. As Eli climbed in, the dog gave a low whine. Not alarm, more acknowledgement. The kind of sound that says, "We saw the same thing, right?" "Yeah," Eli muttered. "We saw it." The drive back felt longer. Snow began again in fine, dry flakes. At the halfway mark, Eli noticed something glittering on the road. He slowed, stepped out, and crouched, low. A line of fine, dark granules ran across the track. Iron filings mixed with glass shards, enough to shred a tire if you hit it at speed. He used the shovel to clear the path, then scattered snow over the rest. No animal made that pattern. It was deliberate. Back at the cabin, he parked the truck facing downhill, just in case. He unloaded supplies, lit the stove, and stood for a long time in the doorway, listening. The forest had that muffled sound again, like it was waiting for something to happen. By evening, the wind returned. The storm moved in heavy, thick flakes. The world outside shrank to a circle of 30 yards. Eli sat at the table with the lockbox open in front of him again, the pages of Dr. Park's notebook spread under the lamp. Her handwriting was precise, calm, utterly unflinching. She had documented 27 samples of creek water, each showing rising levels of arsenic and industrial solvents. The coordinates matched places along the ridge, exactly where Helios Ridge claimed to be, testing seismic stability. He leaned back, rubbed his eyes, and thought about the offer Vale had made. $5,000 to erase a piece of land. That wasn't a bribe, it was a cleanup. Rook got up suddenly, padded to the window, and stared into the dark. Eli turned off the lamp. The firelight flickered against the walls. Outside, faint but real, came the distant whine of an engine. Then silence. Whoever it was didn't approach, just lingered. When the sound finally faded, Eli exhaled through his nose and reached for his pack. He dug out his small satellite phone, the one he hadn't used since leaving search and rescue. It still worked. The battery light glowed green. He scrolled to a number he hadn't called in over a year. Maya Ortiz, journalist, old friend, the kind of person who never learned to shut up when told to. She'd once said the truth was like water. It might take the long way down, but it always found a way through. Eli hesitated for a long time before pressing call. It rang twice. "Ortiz," a voice answered, brisk, all edges. "It's Eli," he said. Pause. Then softer. "Jesus, Mercer, I thought you fell off the grid." "I tried. Didn't stick." "What's wrong?" "I found something up near Timberline Creek. You remember Dr. Elena Park, hydrologist who disappeared back in 2012? "Yeah, vaguely. Why?" "She didn't leave. She left evidence. I've got her samples and data." Maya's tone changed instantly. "You're sure?" "Sure enough that 2 visitors showed up offering to buy me out this morning. Sheriff's in on it." "Okay," she said, already typing by the sound of it. "Send what you can. I'll encrypt it and hold it off-site. I'll scan everything tomorrow. If you don't hear from me by 0530 Mountain, you drop it to the feds. Directly. No local law." "Copy that," Maya said. "Eli, be careful. Whatever you found, they already know you have it." "I know." He ended the call, pulled the battery, and set both pieces on the desk. The wind rattled the eaves. Rook came over, sat by his side, and leaned his weight gently against his leg. A steadying anchor. Eli looked at the stove, the map, the snow pressing against the window, and the soft outline of his dog in the firelight. "The first rule of winter," he murmured, "is don't wait for rescue. You are the rescue." Rook blinked once, slow and deliberate. Outside, the storm built its walls, and inside, the man and his dog began to plan the next move. By dawn, the storm had blown itself into a sullen drift. The sky hung low and pale, as if someone had erased the horizon and forgotten to put it back. Eli Mercer brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon and fed Rook while the stove settled into a steady breathing heat. He'd slept in 2-hour stretches, waking to wind and the occasional engine faint on the ridge. They were probing, getting the lay of the land and the man. He'd seen it in other uniforms, in other countries. The badges changed. The choreography didn't. He laid Dr. Elena Park's notebook on the table and checked his list. Scan. Send to Maya. Split the cash. Make town before noon if the weather holds. Rook waited at the door without impatience. Eli knelt and looped 2 fingers under the dog's collar, their ritual before leaving any shelter. On me, he said. Rook leaned his shoulder lightly into Eli's knee, the answer that meant we move as one. The ridge road was a ribbon of ruts and crust. Eli kept the truck in 4 low, letting momentum do work that throttle couldn't. The forest opened and closed in slow motion, branches heavy with snow. A mile down, the first sabotage showed itself honest as a road sign. A length of wire strung shin-high across the track between 2 saplings. Bark scraped where the line had been hurriedly wrapped. If he'd been moving faster, he would have straddled it and torn a brake line or worse. He stopped 10 yards shy, set the hazards, and stood in the road with his hands in plain sight. The mountain was quiet. No breath in the tree line, no bird complaint. He pulled the wire, wound it into coils, and tossed it into the bed. He marked the trees with a knife nick, his own breadcrumb, then drove on, slower now. The message relayed itself without words. We can reach you. We know your speed. Adjust, and we adjust back. Past the second switchback, he saw tracks cut off into the timber. 2 people on snowshoes, moving parallel to the road for a time, and then angling upslope towards the lookout. He crouched, read the story in the snow. Heavy load on one, lighter on the other. One pole strike deeper than the other. Someone favoring a leg. Fresh within an hour. Leaving, not approaching. A reconnaissance or a rehearsal. He put the truck back in gear and drove the last 3 miles like he was threading a needle. Silverford felt almost cheerful by comparison. The plow had been through once, leaving berms that made the street look like a bobsled run. At the library, 2 pickup trucks idled with no one inside. Engines left on because they sometimes didn't start again after sitting in cold this deep. Eli parked nose out, checked the mirrors, and said, 5 minutes, to Rook, who hopped down to heel at his side. The library had rules about animals. The town had rules about sense. The latter usually won. Inside, the librarian, a woman with steel-gray hair and a sweatshirt emblazoned with "Books are my mountains," glanced at Rook, then at Eli. "If he lies and says he's a service dog, I'll pretend to believe him," she said, not unkind. "Computer 15's open. Printer's got a personality." "Thank you," Eli said. He worked fast. He scanned the first 10 pages of Park's notebook, then the thermal map, then a selection of the lab results. He organized the files into a single encrypted archive, split it into 2 parts, and uploaded both to a dead-drop cloud folder Maya Ortiz had set up years ago. He used his sat phone only to ping Maya a single line from a throwaway email. Partials uploaded. Hold. 0530 rule stands. He closed every tab, cleared history, then copied the same set to 2 micro SD cards, one taped under the library desk with a strip of gaffer, the other under the driver's seat of his truck. You could lose a whole plan to 1 bad hour. The trick was to give yourself more plans than they could ruin. On the way out, he bought a stack of hand warmers from the civic donation bin and left a 20. "You're not from here," the librarian said, printing a receipt she didn't need. "No, ma'am." "But you know how to be here," she said. "That counts." He nodded, took the compliment as the blessing it was, and stepped back into the cold. At the Timberline General, he grabbed kerosene, canned stew, a roll of reflective tacks, 2 cheap contractor locks, and a coil of fishing line. On impulse, he added 3 road flares and a box of roofing nails. The cashier bagged without comment. When Eli got to the door, Sheriff Eldon Maxton came in, bringing a gust of snow and a smell of aftershave laid on too hard. "Morning," Maxton said, as if they were neighbors discussing fence lines and not co-authors of a problem. "Road up to 231 clear enough for you?" "For now." Maxton studied him with an expression that wanted to be casual and hadn't done the reps. "You hear about the Winter Watch program?" he asked. "We do welfare checks for folks living remote. Handy if your vehicle won't turn over." "I'll manage," Eli said. "Sure," Maxton said. "Everyone does, until they don't." He smiled that municipal smile, the one that came with a form attached, and stepped aside. Eli walked past him without touching shoulders. Outside, Conrad Vale's black truck sat at the far pump, idling without a driver. The tailgate logo stared like an emblem from another country. Rook's ears angled toward it and then away. The smart move would have been to go home by the long route, add a half hour and 3 extra turns. Eli took the dumb move that read as smart. He drove straight back, slow, predictable, making himself as uninteresting as a utility crew. The second sabotage sat much closer to home. At the last bend before the lookout spur, where the track narrowed and the fall-off yawned, someone had shoveled snow to conceal a trench cut across the road, an axle breaker if you hit it at 20, a truck-swallowing ditch if you slid. Eli stopped. In time, because he was looking for it, because he had already accepted the central premise of the day. They would keep trying, because trying cost them nothing. He hauled snow and backfilled the bite, packing it with the shovel head until it held. He planted 2 reflective tacks on either side, one high, one low, the sort of marker only the planter notices. Rook watched from the shoulder, ears tracking the forest like separate instruments. Back at the cabin, he staged the first layer of defense that looked nothing like one. He ran fishing line waist-high from the porch post to a birch 30 feet out, tied a handful of roofing nails to the midpoint, and let them rattle softly in the wind. A backcountry tripwire alarm you could hear through a dream. He set a bell on the inside of the door latch. He moved the truck to a position he could start without turning the wheels. None of it would stop a determined push. All of it would buy seconds. In fights that weren't supposed to be fights, seconds were a currency. He split the cash as planned. Original vials and the notebook, sealed in a dry bag, went back into the lead-lined cavity above the stove. The micro-SD with the scan went into a film canister and then into a coffee can he buried 10 yards from the outhouse, 3 inches below the duff where 1,000,000 raccoon prints would mask his own. He made a 3rd copy and slid it into the false bottom of his medkit, because he knew the one place intruders sometimes didn't search thoroughly enough was where the gauze lived. He ate standing up, half a can of stew, and the end of a heel of bread. Rook curled under the table, chin on paws, eyes on the door and the single window that looked north. The world had narrowed to a room and a radius around it that neither of them could see. When the engine came, it came wrong. Choked a little, then revved hard, then choked again. Someone unfamiliar with their machine, or trying to be brave in a place that did not respect bravery. Eli turned the lamp off and waited. The fishing line nails made their faint, steady music. The engine idled on the road for 13 long seconds, then cut. Footsteps in the snow. 2 sets. One heavy, one lighter. He breathed slow through his nose and counted them without meaning to. They didn't come to the door. They circled and stopped near the west wall, where the stovepipe rose. A faint clink. Metal on metal. Rook's body went still and long, a drawn bow. Eli knelt, palm on the dog's shoulder, and felt the tremor of focus there. He slid the window up a crack and listened. A generator coughed to life, muffled. Then the smell reached him. Sweet, oily, unmistakable. Exhaust. He pictured the line at the stovepipe collar, a flexible hose pushed under the flashing and down into the cavity like a snake. A quiet way to make a loud problem no one would solve. He moved without hurry. He shut the stove's dampers, snuffed the fire to keep the draw from pulling poison inside. He grabbed his pry bar, eased the door latch, and stepped onto the porch into a world of white noise. He didn't run. He walked fast and low along the wall, the pry bar now a tool and not a weapon. He reached the stovepipe, found the hose jammed into the collar and anchored with duct tape. He cut the tape in 3 clean motions, pulled the hose free, and let it spit gray breath into the air. Footsteps scrambled down slope. He didn't pursue. He dragged the hose off the edge and kicked snow over its mouth until the generator's cough turned into a stall. Then he listened as the forest took the noise and ate it. When he came back inside, Rook touched his knee, and then no more. Eli opened the stove, let the cabin breathe, and stood by the door with his palm against the wood, as if he could read the temperature of the danger through grain. His heartbeat had stayed mostly level. Not calm, governed. He checked his watch. 4:12 p.m. The light would fall hard in an hour. He took out the sat phone and reassembled it, then typed a longer message to Maya with gloved thumbs. Evidence shows Helios Ridge may be using lava tube network as covert tailings disposal. Park's data consistent. Sheriff compromised. They tried exhaust through stovepipe. 2 individuals, snowshoes, generator. I am safe for now. 0530 rule stands. If I miss check-in, call FBI. Not state, not county. Use USFSLE as alternate. He hit send. The little antenna blinked to the satellite like an eyelid trusting the dark. This was the moral tilt, he realized. Not the moment he'd found Park's note, not the sheriff's smile, not even the wire across the road. It was this. The choice not to meet force with force, but to treat the valley like a patient. Diagnose, stabilize, escalate to higher care when necessary. His job wasn't to win a fight. It was to keep the truth alive long enough to breathe on its own. He boiled water and set a kettle on the back of the now cool stove to humidify the air. He strung a second line of nails along the east wall because sometimes lightning did strike twice. He laid out the med kit, the headlamp, the extra batteries. He checked the rifle's action and then set it aside, as much a confession as a preparation. I'd rather not, but I will. Night folded over the ridge. Snow began again. Soft, insistent, erasing the day's footprints with a kindness that didn't care who had made them. Eli sat on the floor with his back to the stove, and Rook pressed along his thigh. He let his hand find the dog's ribs and count the breaths there, and felt his own breath match it without being asked. Okay, he said into the quiet that wasn't. We keep the light. We keep the line, and at 0530 somebody else joins the fight. Rook's tail tapped once, twice, a metronome for a promise. The nails on the fishing line whispered. Somewhere down slope, a coyote called the snow by its name. Eli closed his eyes and let the plan settle into his bones the way heat settles. Into iron, slowly, fully, ready to be used. The storm broke before dawn, like a sheet tearing in the dark. When Eli Mercer opened the door, the air bit his face the way mountain air does when it decides you should wake up faster. Rook stepped out first, paws sinking past the crust, nose lifted high. The world had gone bright and sharp, every limb of every fur traced in white, the sky a hard enamel blue that only visits after weather has spent itself. Eli stood on the porch with his coffee and let the cold clear the last of the night from his head. He slept in pieces again, waking to check the stovepipe collar and the fishing line nails. No more visitors. Just the wind and the cabin settling and the occasional clunk of snow leaving a branch in a hurry. The generator they'd used for the exhaust trick sat somewhere down in the trees, with a belly full of bad gasoline and his boot print next to it. He liked that fact more than he should have. "Let's walk the edges," he told Rook. They started with the simple things. The stove collar looked clean. The tape residue he'd cut the night before had stiffened into a gray crust he could flake with a thumbnail. He left it, a photograph for any investigator who might ask later. Around the west wall he found 2 sets of snowshoe tracks, iced over now. One long stride, one shorter and uneven. The pattern matched what he'd seen near the switchback, someone favoring a leg. The tracks cut toward the timber and then paralleled the ridge roadway for 100 yards before angling downslope to a small clearing. "Hold," Eli said softly. Rook froze where he was, every sense turned outward. Eli stepped into the clearing and squatted. The snow here had a scuffed look, like people had turned and turned again, indecisive or arguing. He worked backward through the scene the way you learn to at vehicle rollovers and bad falls. Marks, direction, timing. He found a cigarette butt, half buried. Filtered menthol brand you bought in town when you wanted to seem tougher than you were. He bagged it in a Ziploc from his med kit. He found a zip tie tail snapped clean and pressed into the crust, and beside it, the faint print of a boot heel with a small chip missing near the center. Not Maxton's cowboy heels, not a logger's vibram. Contractor issue, maybe Helios. Rook breathed in through his nose and let it out slow, the canine equivalent of a frown. "Same read," Eli said. "They waited here." When he got back within sight of the cabin, something else glinted wrong in the morning light. He followed the line of the cabin roof to the old radio mast and stopped. The coaxial line ran from the mast, down the wall, and under the eave to the desk where Forest Service radios once lived. Somewhere along that run, the cable should have been merely old. Instead, halfway up, the sheath had been neatly sliced and taped back so the wound didn't show at a glance. A sliver of copper winked in the cold. He pulled the ladder from the shed and climbed, Rook posting at the base the way he always did when heights were involved. Up close, the sabotage made professional sense. Cut through the center conductor, then wrap the exterior so snow and time could get blamed. It didn't knock out satellite, but it would kill any chance of him raising a Forest Service repeater with a borrowed radio. He photographed the cut with a coin for scale and labeled the file out loud as he took it. Cable sabotage, morning after stovepipe, coordinates to follow. Talking his own actions into the record steadied him. It also made the cabin feel less alone. Back inside, he notched the discovery into his plan. He finished a bowl of oatmeal, left the stove banked, and laid out the day's gear: microspikes, spare socks, a small throw line, a coil of paracord, 2 carabiners, chem lights, a folding saw, a handheld water test kit he'd carried out of habit for years. He added the SD cards he'd copied overnight, the set not under a library desk or inside a coffee can, and sealed them into a flat pouch that sat under his base layer, warm against his skin. He circled Lava Cut on Dr. Park's thermal map with a pencil, then plotted a route that worked with the grade and the weather. The creek ran east down the draw. Lava Cut, if the map was right, sat on a bench where volcanic rock shouldered through the snow, a place where old fire had hardened into black glass and secret tubes. If Helios was feeding waste into those, the evidence would still be somewhere between liquid and story. "You're coming," he told Rook. It wasn't a question. He swapped the dog's daily collar for a harness with a handle high on the shoulders and clipped a short lead. Rook tolerated the gear with saintly patience. They moved into the trees with the quiet rhythm of 2 beings who'd already agreed on what mattered. The snow took their weight differently. Eli sinking to mid-calf, Rook light-footing across, pausing where scents wrote their essays. The sun worked the ridge like a tired bartender wiping a counter. It wouldn't last. They followed the creek by sound more than sight, a steady under-music under the wilderness, and then dropped into the draw on a switch of elk trails and windfalls. The creek itself showed in places where current had gnawed the snow from underneath. The ice was thick but not trustworthy, opaque in some runs and glass clear in others. Eli tested with his pole before committing weight and angled toward the southwest lip, where the map said the basalt opened. They found lava cut not by seeing it, but by the way the air changed. Cold, yes, but with a chemically sweet bite that didn't belong to pine or creek. Eli tasted it on the back of his tongue and felt his jaw tighten. "Easy," he told Rook, palming the dog to heel. The cut looked like a black grin in the slope, mouth half filled with snow and the snow iced over. A steel rebar grate had once been bolted across the opening, probably back when the Forest Service took a more active interest. That grate now lay bent and wrenched aside. Fresh tool marks scored the rock. On a ledge below the opening, the snow had a soot-gray stain where something had sloshed and then frozen. Eli crouched, slid on microspikes, and found a safe footing at the lip. He anchored himself to a fir with the paracord looped through his harness and over a branch. Rook lay down in a sphinx against the slope and watched him as if each move were a station in a ritual they both knew. The opening exhaled a draft that smelled wrong. He cracked a chemlight and dropped it. The green glow hung and softened, swallowing into the black. He saw a ledge 5 feet down, then ice with a flat sheen, like a pond in a cave, and caught mid-float in the ice itself, a plastic drum cap with a molded hazard symbol half obscured. Past the ice, the flare's light found a dark pipe that vanished into the rock, a conduit not natural to the mountain. He lowered himself to the first ledge and tapped the ice with the ferrule of his pole. Solid. He eased the water test kit from his vest, melted a thumb's worth of surface with the warmth from his gloves, and drew a sample with a pipette. The color strip turned orange-brown faster than it should have. "Arsenic or iron," he said to the air. "Guess which makes money move." When he lifted the strip toward the light, something caught against his wrist. A red thread. He looked up. A fragment of knit fabric had snared on a bolt stub when someone wrenched the grate free. He teased it loose with his knife and bagged it. He followed the bolt's scar and saw the other half of the story. A scuff on the rock at knee height. A long scrape as if a person had slipped and caught themselves hard. At the base of the rock, a tiny bone-white circle lay half buried in snow. He brushed it clear with the side of his glove. Not bone, a button. Smooth, with Elena Park etched shallow across the face. The name rolled around in his chest like a cold stone. He didn't say anything for a while. The chemlight hummed its small green in the dark below. Rook whined once, soft and low. The gentle question that means, do we move or do we wait? "Stay," Eli said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. He photographed the fabric, the bolt, the scrape, the button in place, his watch in frame, the GPS screen, the color strip next to the drum cap in the ice. He spoke the time and coordinates into a voice memo. He did it because he knew later he'd need to remember, and the mind edits when it means well. Then he put the button in a bag, zipped everything to his chest, and hauled himself back up into air that felt honest, even if what it held wasn't. They followed the creek another quarter mile and found another opening, smaller, choked with ice, but with the same wrong smell and the same rebar stubs sawn off clean. On a flat near the bank, a data logger lay half buried, its plastic splintered, the serial plate pried off. He dug it, out with his gloves, and flipped it over. Someone had smashed the SD slot with a punch. A smear of dark residue stained the interior. Diesel, maybe. He bagged it anyway. Broken things still tell the truth when you ask the right questions. On the way back, clouds moved over the ridge like a closing hand. The temperature dropped. Snow began again in needles that found any gap your clothes offered. The trail they'd made softened behind them, the day erasing itself in real time. Rook kept his pace even and his head on a swivel. Twice he stopped and stared uphill, not barking, not posturing, just reading air that carried information Eli didn't have the receptors for. They reached the cabin at dusk. Eli got the fire going high to thaw the ache in his hands, and then set his evidence chain in motion with the careful boredom of a medic laying out instruments. Photos uploaded to the encrypted folder, coordinates noted, voice memos backed up to 2 cards, the park button sealed into a film can and slid under a floorboard he'd loosened back when the cabin still felt unfamiliar. He took a slow breath and called Maya Ortiz on the sat phone. She answered on the first ring. "You're early," she said. "I wasn't expecting your check-in until morning." "I didn't want to wait," Eli said. He described lava cut, the pipe, the drum cap, the smell. He told her about the cable cut and the snowshoe tracks and the damaged data logger. He saved the button for last. "You found what?" Maya said, her voice briefly losing the speed it usually carried. "A button with her name etched," he said. "Caught on a bolt. Looks like she fought to keep that grate in place, or fought someone trying to take it off." Maya went quiet for a beat. When she spoke again, the journalist was back, ironed and ready. "I've got a contact at U.S. Forest Service law enforcement out of Missoula. If you miss your 0530, I trigger FBI and USFS simultaneously. I'll also prep a sealed pitch with an outlet that can make noise fast." "Noise helps," Eli said. "So does muscle." "You need exfil tonight?" she asked. "I can't get anyone there in time, but if you move, I can vector you a safe place in town. Church basement, locked, no windows." "I'm not moving," he said. "They want me to. The evidence is here, and it's safer in 3 hiding places than in the bed of my truck in a ditch. Besides, they already tried to gas me. I'm not giving them the road." Maya exhaled hard. "Okay, send me your raw files now. Trickles, then dump. If I don't hear from you by 5:30, I go." "Copy." He hung up and sent everything in waves, pausing between uploads to listen. Rook lay by the door with his chin on his paws, eyes half closed but angling at every sound. The dog had learned a new soundtrack. Drip of melt, pop of the stove, faint tick of snow hitting the window. He didn't like the new one. The hush that comes when people are near but hiding. Their breath. An engine ghosted the ridge road just before full dark. It didn't come all the way in. It idled and then left, the way a man might walk past a house 3 times before knocking. Eli turned the lamp down and stood in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides, letting his eyes adjust to the firelight and the band of blue twilight leaking around the shutters. "This is the work," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. "You find the bleed. You cut through the clothing. You put a hand where it matters and you stay." Rook's tail thumped once, exactly once, as if to punctuate the sentence. He checked the nails on the fishing line, retied the bell on the latch, and set a pot of water to steam against the dry air. Then he lay on the floor with his back to the stove, and Rook's weight warm along his hip. He closed his eyes and pictured the valley under the snow, the veins of black basalt carrying water to kitchens and cribs, the cut in the rock where someone had pried a grate open and told themselves money was neutral. He pictured Elena Park, with her pencil and patience, choosing to map a thing that didn't want to be named. The wind rose again. The cabin answered with its familiar creaks, Somewhere beyond the trees, a coyote called, and another answered, and then the sound fell back into the snow. Eli set his alarm for 05:10. He felt sleep reach for him, and he let it, because morning would come fast, and it would need both of them. On the desk, the sat phone blinked its soft green, a pulse that matched his own without trying. Outside, under the ice in the black mouth of Lava Cut, the chem light burned down, went dim, and then went out, leaving the underground dark to hold its breath a little longer.